Then when did you actually get interested in recording music? Was there a point where you had a tape machine or?
Well, as I've said, I had a fascination for recorded sound. Didn't really know how it got there. I had no idea of the techniques in cutting records or anything like that at that time. But I remember when I passed my common entrance at 13, my maiden aunt gave me some money. I think it was about £50 or something back in those days. I wanted a tape recorder, but I couldn't afford to go out and buy a tape recorder. So I bought a kit of parts for a tape recorder from a wonderful shop near Edgware Road called Premier Radio. And I built it and it worked. I had a microphone with it. And I used to do my own newscast. I mean, it was only to me. And I'd get a newspaper and read a couple of paragraphs into the microphone. I couldn't play an instrument. I still can't play an instrument. So I didn't have any actually live music to record. And that kept me going, I suppose, until I went into the army to do national service. Having passed my O-levels, and I think sort of halfway to A-level, I decided I wanted to go to university and do radio theory. Well, at that time there weren't any unis doing radio theory. There were radio schools, but my father thought I needed a proper degree. So he found a place called Faraday House in Holborn, and I went there. But when I got there, I discovered that I was going to be trained to build hydroelectric dams in the middle of Africa, which had no interest for me whatsoever. So I left. After a year, I left, having failed every exam in that first year. And so my deferment for national service was cancelled. And I found myself called up for national service to Catterick Camp in Yorkshire. I was very reluctant to go into the army. I wanted to get on and, at that time, make radios. I did 4 weeks basic training, which is marching up and down a parade ground. And then I was posted to one training unit in Catterick, which was a radio school. So at long last, people were teaching me all the things I was desperate to know about. At the end of, I think that was 3 months, and I loved that, absolutely loved it, because my desire for knowledge was being satisfied. And also at that time, one training regiment, the chefs were all trainee chefs for the Royal Yacht. And so the quality of the food was absolutely outstanding. After the 3 months, there was quite a big exam. And we were all told that anyone who got over 95% could choose their posting. I got 98.5%. And so I'd already made up my mind that I wanted to go to Christmas Island. Now, life is strange because Christmas Island, it turned out, was where the British got their troops to stand in a line and watch atomic bomb explosions. Now it turns out that most of those people have now died from cancer that they got during those experiments. But I was told, no, you can't go, you can't choose your posting. Because you got 98.5%, you have to go to the Royal School of Signals, again in Catterick. Well, I protested, but I said, well, why wasn't I told this before? And they said, well, only one person every year gets 98.5%, so we don't bother telling people. Anyhow, so after a 48-hour leave pass, I land up at the Royal School of Signals, and I was promoted to the rank of acting Lance Corporal and told that I was now an instructor in a huge laboratory with absolutely fantastic equipment. I'd never seen test equipment of that standard before. There was only one slight problem, and that is that the Army had built these laboratories, equipped them with all this fantastic test gear, component parts, tools, and got the instructors. There were 3 instructors in my particular laboratory, but the Army had forgotten to get any students. After about a week of doing nothing, we were called to the CO, and the CO said, well, it's going to be about 6 or 9 months before we get any students. What do you want to do? And I can't remember what the other 2 did, but I said, I'm interested in building transistor amplifiers, sir. He said, well, Frost, the best thing you can do is set yourself up a research project to design and build transistor amplifiers. He said, the Army will get and pay for any books you want, any components, any additional test equipment. And so for 6 months, I spent most of my time blowing up transistors because they were very, very fragile at that stage. And I remember there was an output transistor about that big called OC16. And that was the that was a transistor that drove the loudspeaker. And if you had the volume too high, they'd just go. And I think they were about 70 or 80 pounds in those days. In those days, 1959. I just take them back to stores, and stores would order me another one. It would come the next day, another one. And eventually I got through about 17 of these. And the CO called for me, and he said that he had a complaint from the stores that I was getting through these transistors at rather an alarming rate. I said, well, so they're very fragile. He said, well, just try and be a bit more careful, can you? But that was wonderful grounding for me. We eventually did get some students, and there was a madman called Captain Acas who was working on a new technique for amplifying and recording sound. And he used to do these experiments on breadboards. I mean, breadboards were about that square, I suppose, packed full of components. Some transistors, mainly valves. And he tried to get me interested in it, but I had no interest at all in it. And what he was doing was he was digitizing sound. So he made, I think it must have been the first analog to digital converter, which you convert the sine waves into steps. And then he would amplify those steps, and at the end of the chain he'd have a digital to analog converter, which went into a speaker. I really couldn't see the point in digitizing sound. Sure. Because to start with it sounded dreadful. He said, well, no, you're interested in amplifiers, you should be interested in digital sound. I said, I've never heard of it. But he then explained why he'd been given this project, because the Army wanted a way of transmissions more secure. And he devised a way that if you had the audio from walkie-talkies and things digitized, then it's very easy to encode them, so they'd be secure.